Peter Crump here from the Street Farmers. I first found about the Street Farmers through a book by Derek Wall called Earth First in the Roads Movement, and there was a mention of this early 70s group which were radical architects and environmentalists, and he cited them as influential in the radical environmental movement in the early 70s. And my antennae sort of started thinking, well, that sounds quite interesting, and thought I'd try and find out a little bit more about Street Farm. And eventually, with the wonders of the internet, I actually managed to catch hold of Graham Kane originally, who was one of the another members of Street Farm, who actually lives out of the country now. But I did manage to catch up with him, and we had a great chat. And he said, "Oh, actually, there's another member of Street Farm who's a bit more local." So put me in touch with Peter, who's kindly come along to speak to us today. Now I think you're going to show us some images of what Street Farm is, and I'll certainly leave it to Peter, obviously, to explain Street Farm. Afterwards, if we've got a bit of time, we can have some discussion. And are you willing to take questions? That's better. Yeah. So we can do that. Okay, over to you.
Okay, thanks. Really, the first thing to say is that when you get into this situation that I'm in now, with work that you did 40 years ago, basically you failed because you've become part of the spectacle rather than something that's attacking the spectacle. And that's certainly how the situation is, from which we got a lot of our ideas thought about themselves when in about 1970 they published the final blog of all, not a blog, but a booklet of all their papers. And that aside, we did fail, but it's extraordinary for me to look back at what we wrote 40 years ago, because it seems prescient. But it didn't come from the same understanding of the ecological disaster that faces us now, but it came much more from a desire to be autonomous, separated from the state. So our basic thesis was that, well, perhaps I should say where it came from, is that we were given a project when we were students at the Architectural Association to look at a chunk of West London, which in those days it was a semi-derelict corridor. It's where the M40, if you know London, comes in, and it's on raised pilotis. And there are a whole lot of what were brand new buildings going up, tower blocks mostly. It also has Wormwood Scrubs in it, which is, famous prison. It had the main line from this part of the world into London. It had the canal coming in as well. So it was a kind of nexus of communication into which poor people were being stuffed in tower blocks. And we looked at it, and my previous history of that was that I'd worked in Tower Hamlets in the local authority and had struggled for about 2 or 3 years to design council estates that people would actually like to live in, which is, the first thing you have to do is go and find out what people want to live in. There was absolutely no mechanism within the whole of Tower Hamlets authority for me to do that. I couldn't go and meet the tenants who were going to move into the buildings that I was going to design. And to solve the housing problem, they were buying standard Bison blocks from Mr. Bison, and they were 22-storey concrete, square, quite generous in space, but appalling. So, and Bruce who I worked with, had a similar experience in East Kilbride, although possibly the buildings they actually made were slightly nicer than the ones that were going up in London. And so we both knew that you weren't going to get to the solution of providing reasonable housing for people by going down the council route, the state route. And so we did an analysis of what was wrong with the city. And our conclusion very broadly was that it simply was a mechanism for controlling the people who had to live in the city by the state. And unlike other hippies, we didn't think that the answer to that was to escape to the countryside, because that left everybody else behind. And so we looked at solutions which would provide a mixture, a change from the city and the countryside into an entirely different form of, it's not urbanisation, it's not ruralisation, it's something completely different, a different form of community. And one of the best theoretical discussions on that is by a guy called E.A. Gutkind in, I think, 1953. Just, in other words, he's inspired by the war, by the Second World War, where there'd been a huge growth in equality between the different people in the society, and the fact that we won the war, if that is what we did, by mutual aid, and very old anarchist concept. And basically he was advocating a system which would allow that to develop after the war, not under duress. So we used that as a means of constructing utopias. So we did an analysis, and then we thought, well, this is what we want. But of course, being anarchists, we couldn't actually design any of these utopias, because that's obviously not what you do if you're an anarchist. You don't design blueprints for people. So the first Street Farm magazine has a very scattergun approach. And it basically it has no words in it, or almost none. It has loads and loads of images, which are probably contradictory. And it has cartoons, which these cartoons are what people like now. These are the images that they're picking up and saying, these are great cartoons, these are great images. But, I mean, that's the kind of amount of words you get on the page. It says, workers of the world disperse. And then you get Street Farmer 2, and we thought we'd better be a bit more serious, so we did some analysis. Nature of the Beast, which is the paper that you've got. Alternative Everythings. More cartoons. And these images are the ones that people have picked up on. Okay, so can you pause it there, Karen? This is the provisional. Oh, good.
No, I don't think I've got pause on this.
Basically, this is the provisional plan for parks, street farm parks, and it's got two basic texts that run through it. One is talking about how you might organise that.
Stop.
Yeah. That one. Okay. What's gone on?
It paused, sorry.
Go back to now. There are two themes running through here, which are talking about how you might organise, or how people might be organised, or they might organise themselves to take over the streets. There are quotes from various bits and pieces, and then this is a modern image that we've just come to. And this is a Daily Shrigley cartoon, which is one of the best things I found last year. It says it's an unfinished plan for a better society, which is really what we were about. We weren't really about designing a utopia, but we were about providing the means and the analysis to get you there, if you wanted to. I mean, you have to remember this is 1971, so it's only 3 years after 1968, at which point people like us thought we might actually be going to make a difference to the world. And we were full of optimism about what we might be able to do to the world. We hadn't heard of Thatcherism. We'd heard of Thatcher because she was already the milk snatcher. And she was also trying to force the closure of the Architectural Association where we were at college, and we had successfully resisted that and changed. Yeah.
Can I ask why she wanted to close you down?
She wants to move us into London University to make it tidy and to make it cheaper, because the Architectural Association is a private architects association, and so the fees, instead of going into a government-sponsored organisation, go into a private organisation. And so some local authorities were refusing to pay the fees. It's always money. And we resisted that by changing the governors of the school. And there was a student body that made, for a whole term, the student body ran the school by a weekly meeting where everybody was invited, everybody spoke, all decisions were taken collectively. And the product, the academics complained that we were not doing any work. But actually, the student body produced more work of more originality in that term than at any other time in the history of the school, even though they were entirely preoccupied with governing themselves. And that's to me, it's the first time I'd ever experienced it myself. I'd read about it, I'd never experienced it myself. It was a very clear indication that it was a model that worked. But people get fed up with it. It's hard work. It's bloody hard work. And you have to be careful that you don't get bogged down into deciding how many rows of spinach you're going to have to plant and who's going to peel the courgettes this week. Because you lose impetus like that. And so the other thing it tells you is, or it told us, was that all of these organisations are fit for purpose for a very short time, then they should go disappear, and you get another one, because it's the people that make up the organisation that are significant, not the organisations themselves. Okay, so this one it's a provisional farm plan, subject to whim of the people. And basically as I said, there are two themes running through it. One is how you might design a society organise a society, or how a society might be organised so that it would cooperate with itself. And the other one is about vision, about the revolution being impotent without a vision, and the dreamer impotent without a revolution. And how you might, and then a series of images. And that's basically what we were at, was to produce a whole set of images. And then we went, after we'd done this and we'd published the magazine, we were invited to speak at various architectural schools all over Europe and England, and we went on the road with about 300 slides and a tape machine and a couple of borrowed speakers because nobody had a sound system. And we did a slideshow, and we didn't do what I'm doing. We didn't lecture. We just went in, played the show, and if there's anybody left at the end, which sometimes there wasn't, in Italy there was absolutely nobody left at the end, because we made the mistake of translating some of this stuff into Italian, and I think they were pretty disturbed by it. And we took questions very briefly, and then we went off again. And then we did that for about a year and a half until we were fairly exhausted and the money had completely run out. And then Bruce and Graham were at the same time building really Graham's house, which it was, the Observer said it's the first echo house in the world. I think we might dispute, some of the people who live in reasonable housing in Africa might dispute that. It was built in Eltham, in South London, and I don't think we've got slides of his original designs for it. Basically, it was a self-contained house. It had a power generator, It had a sewage system which produced methane on a good day, not often. The methane you used for cooking, and there was a greenhouse for growing bananas, I think was the thing that he was really keen on growing, and a digester. And all of these things are now quite common as bits of kit that you can add to your house. But he had to actually make all this stuff himself. So the loo was made out of glass fibre and had a most peculiar device for separating the urine and the faeces, which was not all that hygienic, I thought. And it had, sitting next to it, there was a pump handle, so that you could pump. There were various tanks in the house that you had to pump the liquids from one to the other. So you went sat in the loo and you're having a bad day, it's a bit of a strain. Get rid of some of your energy that way. And that was there for 2 years, and then Elton College decided that they didn't want this eyesore on their ground, and they moved on to do other stuff. But that was it really. In about 2 years, 3 years, about 75, 76, you could say the street farm had collapsed. But it always consisted of more than just Bruce and Graham and me. The magazine has always had articles. There were 2 magazines, there were papers and pieces by people in the magazine, not us. And they did cover some quite strange things. That there was somebody who wrote about seasonal planting by the phases of the moon, which is it's an idea that's been reintroduced. There was somebody talking about gardening wild herbs, dandelions and nettles and all of that kind of thing. And there was somebody talking about planting on the street and planting, just like you do, just like it's happening in Montpellier now. There are containers out on the roads, people are planting things. And they're in that magazine, which is really weird, because the idea behind the magazine, which was basically, we were quite modest. We just basically wanted to have a world revolution and get rid of the state and live in an anarchist utopia. It's not the end of everything, really. Those ideas seem to me, I may be wrong, but they seem to me to have not be prevalent. They are reduced as a kind of acceptance of the status quo that capitalism is the model, and somehow we have to fit into it. But the bits, the product of all of our work, which came from that idea, not from anything else, have been accepted by the mainstream. And that's true of technology. Technology is not loyal to the people who invent it. Technology can always be subverted by any system that thinks there might be a use to it. I think that's it. I don't think there's anything else I need to say. Anybody got any questions?
Yeah. Sorry about the horrible drumming. It's nice drumming, but distracting drumming.
I'm an architect, except I'm not qualified. And I've worked. After I left London, I came to Bristol because my daughter has a learning disability, and there was nowhere for her. There wasn't a school in London who would take her. She was too anarchic, basically. She wouldn't stand in line, she wouldn't wait in queue, she didn't see the point of standing over here waiting for the food, which was being served over there, and she was totally unreasonable to them. And so eventually we found the only school in England that would offer a place was St Christopher's up on the Downs. So I moved to Bristol so that she could go there with her and my other daughter. And I worked for So Long, which is it's a housing association. And in those early days of So Long, we were a kind of anarchist collective, really. Everybody got paid the same. We all worked any hours that we could manage. I mean, I was a single parent, so that was a great advantage to me. I got paid the same as everybody else. I never got to the office before 10 and I had to leave at 3:30. I did more work than anybody else. That's because I was older and I was the kind of eminence grise, you know, I knew about building regulations and all and stuff like that. And then I don't know, I can't remember why I left exactly. I think I just had enough. And I just was a single parent for living on the social security for 12 years or something like that, looking after my 2 children and having a lot of fun. It's the best job in the world, I think, looking after kids, better than anything else. And more interesting, more difficult, more stressful, and more involving. And in that process, I met various people, women mostly, lots of single women, bringing up children of their own. And one of those people was involved with Greenham, as indeed I was in the peace movement. And so we made I made a teepee and took it to Greenham, and was there when the men got chucked out, and left the teepee, of course. And so there was, and through that, and because of that interest in teepee building, I realised what a great architectural form they are. If only we lived in a slightly less dubious, weather-wise country, they would be brilliant because they're big, they're sturdy, they're communal. You can move them about. If you don't like your neighbour, you can shift away by 20 yards, and it's not hard. And then if you get to like them again, you can move back. You can form a village in the winter. I don't know whether any of you have any contact with the Teepee Valley in Wales, in South Wales, but they own. I think they actually own it now, and originally they just squatted it. But there's a valley, and it has about 20 or 30 teepees in it. And in the summer, they're scattered all over the mountainside, separated. And in the winter, they all come together on one field. Because actually, it's bloody hard work in the winter living in a teepee, I can tell you. It's very cold. You get up, there's not enough daylight. You have to go out and chop your wood and get your water in. By the time you've done that and eaten something, it's dark. So you've got to go to bed, and it's cold. So you want to stay in bed until it's light in the morning. So you don't want to be walking miles to see your friends. But next door, that's great. And then sometime after that, I was told by the DHS that I couldn't claim Social Security anymore because my youngest child was more than 16, and therefore didn't need a permanent parent at home any longer. And it was a scheme to get us back, us long-term, non-working bastards, living off the state. I can't remember what it was called now. Anyway, you got a slightly enhanced dole, and you had to come up with some scheme that allowed you to, that introduced you to work again. And so basically I was self-employed as a designer architect, but you weren't allowed, this government thinking, you weren't allowed to take up a previous profession or job that you'd done before. So I had to call it something else. So I called it Weather Enhanced Environmental System Analysis, which just happened to spell Wheezes. And nobody sussed it together, as far as I know. Nobody even laughed. Nobody even thought it was funny that I'd got my business was called Wheezes, which is exactly what it was. It was a wheeze. And then I've just gone on doing that ever since. Yeah.
Do you think that with the current economic crisis and stuff which is going on there, that people are starting to look forward to members again? I mean, I was involved in sort of like free festivals and stuff in the early 90s, and there seemed to be resurgence of different ideas of living, and then it's gone quite quiet for a long time, but now we seem to be, I mean, I know stuff develops, but there seems to be a lot more people looking at different ways of living, be that working less or living differently or growing animal food. Do Do you think that is occurring now? Do you think that
I think
capital is people are looking at capitalism and saying actually this is not for us now? You know, you were saying that it's been generally accepted. I don't know if it's acceptance is the word. I mean, it's enforcement, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, acceptance is going, yes, it's okay.
Yeah, but it's also in 1970 the Soviet Union still existed, you know, as a model. Even if you didn't think it was brilliant, you kind of, it was there. It had aims and that you might in general agree with, and that's destroyed. So and I think the thing about capitalism is that it is triumphant, and it's very hard to resist triumphalism, and yet it patently doesn't work. I mean, you know, we go into all that if you like, but it seems to me blindingly obvious it doesn't work because everybody's unhappy. You know, even the rich ones are unhappy. So it obviously is not going too well. And yeah, I think that if there is, I think that ordinary individual people don't cooperate willingly unless they're under some form of stress, and then they do, and it's getting into that position where they do cooperate willingly and lovingly with each other, and somehow extending that forwards so that it doesn't disappear when things get a little bit better. And I think that's the problem of all revolutions, because if you think of being in a revolution, you know, and think of those guys in Leningrad, you know, walking towards soldiers with guns. This is extraordinary. I mean, where do you get the courage to do that? I don't know where you get the courage to do that. But you get that from solidarity with ordinary people. And if you get under pressure, then I think you can do. Yes, I think you might find that people will examine alternative ways of behaviour and alternative economic and cultural systems. Yes.
Right. I was just going to say, did you have any run-ins with the planners in the 70s?
Of course not. No. I'm a really good architect. No, I don't have run-ins with planners ever. It's very simple. There's a set of rules that you have to obey. If you obey the rules, you get planning permission. If you don't obey the rules, you don't. It's very simple. So, you know, if you don't... There's no... The rules are very abstract. They're not... you can only do what we like.
There's a question over here, Peter.
It's trying to bring together that thing of, like, now capitalism's kind of being accepted, or where, like, it's, of course it's imposed, but that thing that you were saying of not wanting to retreat to the countryside because you didn't want to leave people behind, and this idea of, like, yeah, I want to overthrow the state and all live in an anarchist utopia, but the way, how do you build that isn't the equivalent, like, retreat to the countryside that's disconnecting for a lot of people who, I like, of course it's an imposition, but I think at some level it is acceptance. I don't think you can entirely say some kind of, this is like just some brainwashed ideology entirely imposed upon these people, because it's articulated in actual living conditions which people like live through and engage with, and like how do we not create this like thing that removes itself and is like, we will create this anarchist utopia that doesn't connect with these other people who want to be a part of it as well.
Well, I think that I think probably you have to have a revolution is a good way of starting. And on one of these slides, I can't remember which one, there's a quote from Vanagon, who is one of the situationists, and he says, the moment of revolution must bring an instant improvement in the quality of life to everyone. He meant everyone, you know, not just to the suppressed and the poor and the needy, but to everyone, because actually nobody's happy. That's his point. That, you know, and I think you certainly won't get any change by disengaging from it and going off to some you know, some apparently better place and living there. That won't change anything. The state can perfectly easily deal with that. But the city itself it's a manifestation of the state in a very clear way. And there are ways that you can take bits of the city back, and the state will react, won't it? I mean, what happens with Tesco, you know? It's very clear that if you try and take bits of the state away from it, it hurts it and it reacts in a very strong way. And but you can do it. You can take back your street corner and your street, and you know, and then everybody who supported you will forget what you've done, and you'll find that you lose their support. But you do need also that communal support to do it. It has to be an improvement for everybody, and that's very hard to generate. But I think you can pinch bits back. And one of the easiest ways is to. I heard a guy talking on the radio about the error of the British road system, and his analysis was that the mistake that we made, not us, back in about 1917, quite recently basically, well, not that recent, is it? It's 100 years ago. The planners imposed status on roads, so that some roads became main roads and some roads became minor roads. And from that mistake, as he put it, all our problems with traffic are generated. Because if we hadn't got that, we wouldn't have to have traffic lights or roundabouts or stop signs or any of the other stuff, because everybody would be very cautious. If you didn't know who got priority at a junction, you aren't going to go speeding through, are you? You're going to go quite slowly to make sure you don't get whacked into. And there is, I think it's in Copenhagen, there is an area of Copenhagen which doesn't have any street signs, doesn't have any halt signs, doesn't have any directions, nobody's got priority, and it's the safest part of the city to live in terms of accidents with motor cars, because everybody's going slow. And it's that kind of accretion that you can make. But yeah, I mean, I think you know, basically you have to be oppressed to want to fight, and it has to be a majority of the people who are being oppressed, not just a minority.
Picking up on this theme of revolution, I'm sort of interested in this, whether there's tension or an overlap between the, because you were saying, and I think from what I know about Street Farm, it's quite interesting that idea is explored about a blueprint, and very much about revolution needing a vision. And is at what point does a vision become a blueprint, or what is the tension between those two things? And I suppose linked to that, maybe this is a question in two halves. I'm quite interested in I don't know what ideas you had about control of territory and the control of the city and the land, because I know sort of in terms of interest in garden cities, you had a sort of an alternative really. You had sort of state ownership, capitalist ownership, but then there was an idea about having community leased ownership, so you would pay into a community fund, and in effect that land would be collectively owned by a community, but it looked like they were trying to sort of find a bridge between the opposites and try and find something that was workable and a bit more kind of collectively appropriate in that sense.
I mean, I think co-op's a great idea.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that co-op and ownership go together in a very healthy relationship. And I think it's the ownership which is the problem. And it's a pretty big if land was free, then I think we'd be 50% way towards solving that particular problem. About who owns things, if nobody owns anything, it isn't a problem. But it's, you know, we like to clasp things to us. I do. I like to hang on to my stuff. And it's a part of being a human being. It's a conflict between us. But we can't abrogate that responsibility to the state to sort it out for us, and that's basically the model that we're working under. We don't have any responsibilities. Instead, we pay. We pay tax. And
so an alternative would be some sort of usufruct kind of system where you have access to what you need.
Yeah.
but it's a very different model of ownership to the one that we're familiar with.
Yeah, and also we have to get rid of the idea that there's a shortage of stuff in the world, but there isn't. There's a glut. It's a glut of everything. It's a glut of energy, it's a glut of food. It's just extremely badly distributed. Probably. I don't know there's a glut anymore. There used to be in the 70s. You could almost prove that there was a glut of food and there's a glut of energy. But now it's changed because the population has increased. But also, it's something I was reading in the 50s, that was written in the 50s. Somebody was saying, because the answer to the population problem is everybody's got to get rich because then the populations go down. And it's true. The reproduction rate among rich people is much lower than the reproduction rate among poor people, because the poor people have got nothing else to do.
Everyone can get rich. It doesn't work as a model. People are only getting rich by accumulating it from other people. Everyone gets rich.
Well, you can all get better off.
Yeah.
The poor can get richer, and the rich can get poorer. You can tend toward a mean.
Yeah.
It's not likely to happen without some kind of a fight, because the rich hang on to it. I don't know, but maybe I'm not a theoretician.
If I could just throw in a clarifying point, I can confirm that there is definitely still more food than we need to feed ourselves. We need to investigate stuff around GM crops. It's very clear we have massive glut. Part of it's to do with land use for biofuels, part of it's to do with land use for animal feed. We can more than feed ourselves. It's definitely about distribution. Historical analysis of most families demonstrates that it's almost never lack of food which causes people to stop. It's character and lack of access to it. So that's the wealth thing being what brings population down. I think stability and social security brings population to the stable point. We've already got a population. It's definitely something that's being applied by the mainstream as a reason for us to close down borders, be more aggressive, because it's actually
Are there good, is it Liz, your name? Are there good sources for that kind of information? Because we're always fed, those... okay. That wasn't a cue, but...
yeah, there is information on the GM.
Right.
There's a new website, Stop GM, that's got some stuff around land access and food availability. It's not the best place for population stuff, but I know there are other places that Bristol is being able to put in the direction of if anybody picks up a copy of Space Movement, that's got some really interesting stuff about population availability. And those will be on sale around Bookfair today as well. So.
Yeah.
I came along partly because I live in Bournemouth, and the most radical thing happening is the transition movement, trying to use kind of permaculture principles to figure out how to shift kind of culture we live in to one that's capable of facing the challenges of climate change and peak oil and all that other stuff as well. And I guess I was wondering, do you see connections, or is it interesting to talk about the connections between street farming and transition? There seems to be some similarities.
Yeah, I think transition is a great idea, but street farm is not a current project, if you know what I mean. It's a 1970s project, so it is about transition, but I don't think there's a direct connection between it and climate change. I mean, the awareness of climate change, because we weren't aware of that. That wasn't something. We talked about ecology, but as I said, not from the basis of a threat to the survival of the world, but because we were looking at ways of diversifying the societies in which we lived, because we thought that ecological systems, natural ecological systems, were extremely complex, the very opposite of the kind of systems that the state introduces to control control our lives, which are very simple. And we were looking at that for that reason, and also because we thought we might get some autonomy from the state by producing our own electricity, cleaning our own water, by, you know. And I mean, one of the books that we read with great joy was The Ragged Trousered Philanthropist by Robert Tresser, which is written about workers in outside Hastings in 1914, I think, either just before or just after the First World War. And there's a great speech in there about where he's saying that that water used to be free, fuel used to be free. They've taken the water away and making us pay for it. They've taken the fuel away from us and making us pay for it. It's ours. It was ours. We should have it for free. We always had it for free for thousands of years. And if they could only find a way of taking away the air, they'd make us pay to breathe that as well. And I finished reading that book, and I was looking in a magazine, and there was a photograph of a bloke in Tokyo at an oxygen machine. They have found a way. They do know there is a way, and you know it's happening. They'll make us pay for everything, which should be ours. Yeah.
Sorry, I was listening to you. Are you the Bristol Gnomes?
Am I?
Were you a member of the Bristol Gnomes?
No, Graham was a Bristol Gnome.
Yeah, that's right,
yeah.
Because your work for the Barnhill settlements is under threat because they're redeveloping that road. Yeah.
Oh, Graham will be
Do you know
pissed
that?
off.
Yeah, you can tell. Do you know the bit where it used to be the entrance?
Yes.
And it's got all that work done around it there.
Yeah, they're really nice set of doors in there.
They're cutting that whole farmhouse and putting lift shafts and things.
Oh.
I'm trying to see the different ones.
Okay.
I'll speak to you later.
Yeah, I'll speak to you after.
Bristol Gnomes?
They were woodworkers. Do you not know about them? Graham. Graham is quite a piece of work. Graham and I met at the AA both on our first days. We were, both of us, neither of us had been doing, the architectural course is divided into two. There's a kind of undergraduate course and then there's a postgraduate course. And both Graham and I came into the AA in the middle of the course, so we had no friends. And walking into the AA, if you've been in the Northern Polytechnic, which I've been in 1960 or whatever, was quite weird because there weren't desks. There wasn't a guy sitting at the end talking. There was a bunch of people sitting in a room a bit like this. And there was a table with some wine on it and some glasses, and we were kind of and I was sitting next to him because we were right at the back because we were new boys. And he said, "Do you think anybody can have any of that wine?" And I said, "Oh, bloody no." And he said, "Well, we should go and try." So we went down and we just took a bottle of wine and buggered off the back of the bench again. And from then on we were great friends, and we still are. And he moved to Bristol after I did. And because he wanted to, he'd done various communal jobs, like he set up a communal farm in East London. What's it called? That place that's going to be flooded any moment now, the housing estate. Anyway, they gave him a Nissen hut, and he made a city farm out of it. He and his wife lived at one end, and the pigs and the chickens lived at the other, basically. And then he came to Bristol, and he wanted to do a workshop. And we found that we could go over to Lydney and buy the offcuts from these amazing pieces of ply, which were being used for making wardrobes and stuff like that. And it was really lovely stuff, and they didn't want it. They were giving it away. But of course, it comes in bits. You know, it's what's left from a sheet of plywood when you've cut out a wardrobe. It doesn't make good things easily. But Graham discovered that by sticking them together and gluing them, you could build it up into a kind of block. And then he took a chainsaw to it, basically, and he carved the ply, and then sanded it down, and then turned it into doors, and actually whole buildings. And so there is the house that he designed and built, which is in St Werburgh's, and the St Werburgh's City Cafe. It's the St Werburgh's City Farm Cafe is one of his pieces of work, and the original community hall on the farm is his. And he did work at the settlement and also at a playgroup in Easton somewhere. And he also did a lot of work for hippies in Glastonbury. So if you go to Glastonbury, you'll see some of his work there. And it's basically, he's not exactly an anarchist. He's more a formalist with Gaudi-ish intentions, which means that his shapes are quite natural, but there's a kind of basic formality to his structures. Yeah, that's who he is. And he and Martin worked together for a long time, and they were the British Bristol Gnomes, and it's extraordinary stuff. Because people look at it and go, you either like it or you really hate it, because it looks like plastic, but when you touch it and feel it, it obviously isn't plastic, it's made out of timber. But because it's got these great big grains running through it, which of course are the ply, it's not the grain of the natural grain of the wood. So it's a slightly mysterious product. That's who they are. And yeah, I think those doors Martin made those doors, and they're really lovely. They're delicate, aren't they? Quite delicate, and they had strips.
It was all the way inside as well.
Pillars, yeah. Oh, and the pillars were the cords from it doesn't exist anymore, but they used to import hardwood from all over the world up the Severn, and they put them on these enormous spinning lathes, and they had introduced a thin knife to the edge, and they cut the veneers off. They cut the veneers off in great long rolls, and you're left with, because this is a big log, it's got massive things at either end of it that spin it. And of course, when it gets to that point, you can't get the blade any closer, so that piece in the middle of the log is thrown away. And we found we could have them for nothing. And so Graham made quite a lot of buildings with pillars in, made out of hardwood. And they're lovely. They're really nice.
So Alec, do you think do they know about the significance of this gnome work? Do you think they'll save it, or?
Well, I'm trying to
yeah.
Since he lives here, 100 years.
Okay.
And they've got money from community builders to redevelop. It needs it. I mean, the building that we're talking about is one 18th century farmhouse, but they need to redevelop it. The old work is the old entrance to the settlement, and it's under threat. So I don't know quite what to do with it, because I can't store it in my.
No, I did send an email to try and find out what they were going to do with it, but I didn't hear anything back, and I didn't know whether they were going to try and.
Well, we're meeting next on the 10th of May, so I'll bring it up. But I think I'd love to store it somewhere and build it somewhere.
Yeah.
Possibly the city farm. Somewhere like that.
Yeah.
To see it for posterity, because it's quite unique.
Can't they incorporate it in the new design?
No, the design is totally not like that at all. It's like 21st century.
Well, maybe I should go back to the drawing board.
No, it should go in the museum. Graham would be really pleased if it's in a museum.
Where did cars fit into the street farm?
Cars? No,
plan?
not a lot. Tractors.
No, tractors, but not cars.
Yeah. This is Grace Slick, by the way. You should be hearing, no, not now. You should have been hearing Grace Slick with, what's the band called?
Jefferson Starship.
Yeah, Jefferson Starship. With that cartoon. It's all about going off to a new world in the sky. And yeah, Bruce was quite keen on Grace. So she features heavily as a tractor driver in the cartoon.
You also had connections with Pink Fairies, didn't you?
We did. But it's quite weird for us both, because Bruce and I haven't actually spoken for about 38 years. And I did a lecture, a very bad lecture in London, and he attended as an anonymous person in the back row. And after that, we decided that we weren't going to be ripped off by these bastards any longer, using our material for promoting their nefarious business. And so we have got back together again, sort of, and we are constructing a website with what we can dig out of the ground of our old material. So this is an original, obviously, somewhat faded, but the kind of rather blurred. We've lost the originals of this cartoon, and so this is a copy of the actual magazine, of which we have one copy. But it's likely that we will find some more stuff, because we haven't got to the bottom of the various bags that the stuff was dumped in all that time ago, and we actually did a television program called Open Door, which was an open access program for anybody, any kind of group to go on and make your own television program, which we attempted to do with great ambition and appalling technical backup from the BBC. But we have got a copy of that. Unfortunately, it's got a timeline running all the way down the middle of it, and, so it counts down, quite big, not small. It's not in the bottom, it's right down the middle is the only copy we've got. But there are bits from that we might be able to resurrect. And we also made a very strange film as part of our diploma show about the West London stuff on Super 8, which is an appalling medium. It's only as big as this, and to try and do anything at all with it is ridiculous, but we did. And we've got the first half of that, which unfortunately is, as it were, the analysis bit, so it's all in black and white, basically. And then halfway through it changed to colour, and the music all got a lot more cheerful, and we stopped playing John Lennon talking about loneliness, and we did Grace Slick instead. Unfortunately, we've lost the second half. Well, we haven't found it yet. And there are some great moments in that. Very funny. It's hilariously funny. Mostly it's funny. What's extraordinary is the rarity of seeing cars going past on the street. It's really weird. I've forgotten completely how there weren't any cars. You could walk along the streets without getting run over. It was extraordinary. And very old-fashioned cars. But anyway, all of this stuff will eventually, hopefully, maybe, get up onto a website. And we will, and on this bit of paper there is a temporary website address which will change, and because it says it all twice for some reason, we can't figure out why. And some of this stuff is now up on that website, which you can go and look at. And we will slowly, if we can, and if we find, it depends on what we find, we will put more stuff up on. So we did make 3 or 4 movies, and there's that television program which, if we can find a good copy, we'll put up. And the last thing I wanted to say was the David Shrigley cartoon right at the end. I don't know if you know about David Shrigley, but he does these very strange cartoons. I mean, they're not all very. I don't find them all very funny. Some of them I find so funny you want to be sick. But in amongst them, are you stopping it? No. In amongst them, right at the end of this show, there is my very favourite one, which is.
You want me to do it?
Yeah. Just to keep going on again to the next one.
Let's go to the slide now. This one, which is An Unfinished Plan for a New and Better Society by David Shrigley. And that's an absolutely perfect piece of street farm architecture. 2010. Thank you.
The soccer versus the state, which is kind of tackling radical football and politics. So, but he's
He's written an awful lot of different books now. He's written one on straight edge, the history of sort of straight edge and hardcore punk, and 2 books on German anarchists, one of which he's going to talk about today. So he's pretty